minds like us, growing in years, with a goal to make a change of the world around your race. They've been able to set the pace.
Hello and welcome to your favorite program, Youth Engage. Today, our icon and profile in this episode belongs to the class of very few Nigerian public servants, dubbed as one of the three triumvirate and pace setters in the history of civil service in Nigeria, who successfully imbibed the discipline and character that the British colonial masters tried to bequeath to Nigerians. He is none other than Chief Phillip Asiodu, CON, who left the nation's civil service with the unofficial tag of Super Permanent Secretary, a reputation largely associated with immense stature he acquired in government and the influence he wielded in the public service. Phillip Asiodu was born on February 26, 1934 in Lagos State to Mr. Philip Chibuzo and Mrs. Caroline Nodu Asiodu. He attended Hope Waddell Training Institute, Calabar, and St. Paul's School, Ebutimeta, Lagos, before proceeding to King's College, Lagos, where his several brilliant performances as an astute sportsman and intercollegiate tournament hero culminated in key positions for him as a house captain, school prefect, and chairman of the elitist student council, King's College Society, before he proceeded to Queen's College, Oxford, where he obtained at first a bachelor's and later a master's degree in philosophy, politics, and economics, PPE, then referred to as Modern Greats, in September 1956. He also added a diploma in French language studies from the University of Poitiers. When Chief Asiodu, the Izoma Ahaba of Asaba, where he comes from, joined the Nigerian civil service in 1960 at the age of 26, he was privileged to serve under the cover of the British Permanent Mission under a distinguished British diplomat, Sir Pearson Dixon. Phillip Asiodu was posted to the Ministry of External Affairs in Lagos and as the representative of Nigeria on the Six Nation Provisional Secretariat of the Nascent Organization of African Unity, OAU, at Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. Chief Asiodu first served under General Gowon before and during the Nigeria-Biafra War. He was instrumental in the U-turn of the Aburi Accord by Gowon. He later became special advisor to the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, Alhaji Shehu Shagari, on economic affairs. In 1999, he was appointed Chief Economic Advisor to the former Nigerian President, Chief Olusegun Obasanjo, and happily married to Mrs. Eugenia Olajumoke Ni Pereira. They are graciously blessed with children and grandchildren. Welcome to Youth Engage.
When I was very young, I was one of those who really admired and became influenced by Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe, who in 1937 produced a book, Renaissance Africa, in which he was talking about the African again commanding respect in the world. And you know that, again, it's a pity we in Nigeria these days do not think about things which will ennoble and inspire the spirit. If you read some of the writings by an English scholar, Basil Davidson, he said, for instance, that when the Greeks first encountered the blacks, they thought even the blacks had a higher civilization. And you remember that when the Portuguese first came here, they exchanged ambassadors with Benin Empire. And even the Frobenius, the writer, said that, until the 19th century, with the discovery by Macadam, one engineer, Macadam, of how to use bitumen to make permanent surfaces for roads. Roads in Europe, roads in Africa were all laterite, And so when they first came to Benin, They were astounded that the streets in Benin were straighter and wider than those in Lisbon. And Lisbon, the Portuguese had led to the discovery of America for Europe and all that. So, but with the imposition of the Atlantic slave trade, we lost all that respect. You do not enslave an equal. You had to construct a theory of inferiority or subordination. Now, Zeke, having studied in America, participated, saw how the people who had been taking their slaves were now liberated but still suppressed. You can still see that Ku Klux Klan and all that in America. You know, and with people like Marcus Garvey and George Padmore talking about Pan-Africa. He first went to Ghana, where he started a newspaper, and the British nearly jailed him for sedition. Then he came here. He was inspired by this struggle of the blacks there to regain equality and respect. And of course, this coincided with the era of colonialism. After the Berlin Conference, the Europeans shared Africa across tribe, across, didn't care. And so he came preaching. He met the Nigerian youth movement, joined them, and together they started this struggle for independence. And he produced this book, Renaissance Africa, in which, in fact, he was saying that the African they were in the political jingo of those days, must have a kind of risorgimento. This is something from the Italian unification, but a renaissance, a rediscovery. Now, when you bear that in mind, and you come and look at the emerging, and this is the age in which you people are going to play. What are we entering into? We are now entering into century of Asian dominance, because within the next 10 years, China is the largest economy, followed by America, but the number 2 and 3 will be India and Japan. So, and thanks to Trump and all that, they are saying goodbye to the Anglo-Saxon post-Second World War dominance of the world. So we are entering an age of Asian dominance. Fine, that's good. But the important thing is that North and South America are one market. Despite Brexit, Europe has rediscovered its unity. Asia, with 6,000 years of statecraft and diplomacy, I'm sure China is going to reach an accommodation with India and Japan and dominate that. In any case, India and China alone will be 3 billion people. Then you put Japan. Nigeria is the only place where you have a sizable black population with adequate resources to command some global significance. And it's distressing for me to hear people talk about secession and disintegration, because that will only confine you to a millennium of slavery. Because even with Nigeria, let's say by 2050, you could be 400 million people if you don't control birth. But you can't control birth if you don't advance economically. It goes together. By the time you advance economically, none of your children is going to have 8 children, 10 children, because you know what it takes. And if you have rural electricity, and the men have pubs they go to till 10, on cinemas to see. By the time they come home, they are going to sleep, isn't it? Not breathing. So that's a different dimension. But until 2050, we are going to. And at present, 70% of Nigerians are under 35. Maybe 40% are within the childbearing age. So the population may continue to grow at 3 to 2.5%. Now, even with all that, the whole of Africa at present is about 1 billion. It may reach 2 billion in a world of 12 billion. Is that the continent you want to atomize? So it doesn't make sense. And there are other reasons, So that was one's inspiration. Now, coming then to the concept of the Civil War, of Nigeria to break up, and that possibility of Nigeria as a vanguard of African Renaissance would never be materialized. So, beyond the ministerial assignments, we took an interest because when the Civil War broke out, the Nigerian army was only 10,000. By the time, at the peak of the Civil War, it was over 200,000. Now, the logistics, making sure there was food, equipment, and all that, is a function of management and administration, which, thank God, both Ironsi and Gawan left the civil service intact. They didn't do what happened to the civil service in 1975, the decimation and destruction of the public service under Murtala and Obasanjo. So the civil service was able to organize that logistics. But apart from that, the Biafrans, under my friend, and we were friends in King's College, friends in Oxford, Ojukwu, now had quite good propaganda. It had to be countered. So Joda, Aida, and myself often had to go abroad, whether to Europe, to America, to explain. Because as far as the Biafran propaganda was concerned, it was Muslim dervishes against Christians, which wasn't the fact. Two, there was the feeling that after the war, it will be genocide and complete suppression of the Igbo people, which was not the intention. Number of Igbos who lived in the north as civil servants, as traders and all that. Many of them, even Muslim ones, married to Igbos or Yorubas, as you know. So it wasn't a clear-cut case of Muslims versus Christians, Northerners versus Southerners. So we traveled quite a lot and having to explain. And as you know, under de Gaulle, we also had to help to counter the propaganda. But it's not everybody that wants to go the extra mile. But three of us, we were quite willing when things were escalating and we thought Gawan wasn't quite understanding Ojukwu. Mr. Ida and myself wrote a long letter to Ojukwu telling him that if you have special things you want to see happen, let us know. We can prepare and talk about it. But that secession should not be on the table, because if it did, there will be war. And if there is war, except there was immediate recognition of Biafra by a great power supporting them, that's the end of it. Two, they didn't even have then the diplomacy or tact to offer the Rivers people and Ogoja people a federal system in Biafra. And you know that Ibibio State Union is the oldest state union in Nigeria, long before Igbo State Union or Igbo Modudua. And Calabar Ogoja Rivers campaign was on before independence. It was acknowledged by Willing. But without that, surely, so once the federal government, and we knew what the federal government was going to do in terms of creation of states, and once you created Calabar Ogoja River, Calabar, Cross River, and Rivers, you're landlocked, And so we tried to explain that war was not an option or a viable option and all that. And then it's true, coincidentally, both Aida himself, myself, and late Oluwasami, when we were together in Oxford, Oluwasami had come from Harvard to do a stint in Oxford. We were all consulting, meeting about Nigeria, a great Nigeria. And in our days in Oxford, we even refused to have the Nigerian Students' Union branch there. We had the West African Students' Union, and so forth and so on. So we're reminding him of all that. And so I had cause to say that when they said, well, Igbos, I said, I myself was Igbo speaking. But here I am, and I'm on the federal side. This man from Chicago Tribune, in writing his article, said they interviewed my name, an Oxford-educated Nigeria, a former member of the Igbo tribe. So as far as they were concerned, Igbos, Hausas were like Democrats and Republicans. If I could be on the federal side, I must have resigned from it. I'm just showing you the kind of audience, so the gullibility. And I went to St. Louis, and being interviewed, and there was this Monsignor, trying to paint this picture of anti-Christian, that the Nigerian Civil War was anti-Christian. And Nigerian troops had captured Owerri and then were pushed away briefly by the Biafrans. And so Owerri Cathedral has been under construction like all cathedrals for several decades. So it had all the scaffolding. And they were now projecting this thing in St. Louis. You know where St. Louis is? In the middle of America, You when you get to New York, you fly 3 hours before you get there, in Missouri, and saying, well, these Biafrans, they are so Christian. So as soon as they came back to Owerri, they are trying to rebuild the cathedral, destroyed by, that sort of thing. Anyway, those are the more ridiculous parts of things you had to counter. But the more interesting part was painting to serious governments the possibilities of reconciliation after war and the possibilities for Nigeria. Not that it is the duty of a white man to enable a black man to progress. Get it out of your mind. If you progress, they will work with you. If you want to remain in your backwardness, it's better for them. But to show that, and if you progress, it is also to their advantage. The exchange between two developed economies is better than the exchange between one developed economy and a backward one. And so we tried to do these things. Now, to some people, this was not good. But to some others, this was excellent. So we were known as Three Musketeers because of that. People in the Supreme Military Council appreciated our efforts, and we would stay with them every evening in a little committee. They will read the situation report, and policy decisions will be taken. Our wives will be wondering whether we'll be killed or kidnapped. We may not come home till 3 a.m. or 4 a.m., but it was worth it because I still, myself, believe in the dreams of Zik in his Renaissance Africa. We are the only combination of resources and population under blacks which can make a global impact. And it is our duty to preserve this country. And it can be done. Within 20 years of good policies, we can abolish illiteracy. There'll be no disadvantaged states. No reason for anybody, therefore, to apply a mechanistic type of federal character and affirmative action to compound mediocrity in critical positions in government. And if we've all gone to the same schools, subject to this global bombardment by media, wear the same clothes, luckily for us, we are only the same color, by and large. 20 years hence, we will be talking ethnicism and tribes. Why must we, because of some inconveniences, personal ones of today, prejudice what could be a glorious future? Before the coup of 75, we had made this plan for compulsory education. But we started with teaching the teachers, getting them ready. Then there was the coup. And they rushed into 76 to start the program. Fine. But unfortunately, they had destroyed the civil service, which had the authority to have insisted that money voted for education will go for education. Because as I'm speaking to you, the people who came to power after Murtala and Obasanjo and co, were captains by the time of the first coup. If we wore the permanent secretary's uniform of the colonial days, our epaulets would show that we were lieutenant generals. It's a pity we abandoned the uniform, because if we had it, I've seen the automatic salutes, which visiting soldiers who came with the International Observer Group, from different countries. As soon as our people saw their epaulets, automatic. And you remember that when Shoinka was doing Konji's harvest and they were filming it, and they had Konji Republic, and they allowed them to have a few cars with flags. You could see our people without knowing what flag is this, So the point I'm making is that many of these people, they came to power, were used. Gawan, in fact, was the last who knew, because he used to come to the inter-ministerial consultations on things. The others below him were used to taking command from people in uniform. Only Gawan and other people knew how high he rose in the army to go into interministerial consultations on policy. So those below thought, because they took orders from people in uniform, they probably thought the army was self-sufficient in thinking. They had not read Clemenceau, Churchill and co., who even remarked that war was too serious a matter to be left to generals, let alone running a country. But the first two military regimes recognized the role, the possibilities of the civil service. And before them, the older people in the First Republic, they went into politics as successful traders, merchants, lawyers, doctors, retired teachers. Even they knew what the civil service could do. And the greatest tragedy is the destruction of the public service. And we must find a way of bringing it back. Because in those days, a politician says something, take note of it. By the time they come to power, you already try and work out, because that was your duty, options possible for bringing into effect what they were talking about. And so you go to Honorable Minister, sir. You remember that your brilliant speech in Agege? Brilliant speech. Here are the possibilities. It's very few people who will see good things presented to them and say, no, I will take the bad thing. It's very few people whom you would speak to authoritatively and say, this happened before, this was the result, this happened, and say, I will take the bad one. But you must have an institution with memory, with ability, capable of developing these options. And that is why when we were preparing for independence, and there were the conferences before independence, in 1954, the question arose, because they were now going to have regional self-government, regional premiers and all that, saying, what sort of civil service would you have? And the British said, well, from my experience, the best thing is an independent, non-political civil service. They had civil service of cousins of kings and all that sort of rubbish. But when they were challenged in India, with running India, then they developed this idea of independent civil service commissions, certain standards must be met, and so forth and so on. When it worked in India, they now imported it under Lord Trevelyan around 1854 to England, and it has served them well. And they said, it's better to have a civil service, promotions, discipline and all that, an independent public service commission. Not a civil service which will change with change of government. Countries which had gone that way had found it disastrous, and so forth and so on. And our founding fathers, Zik, Sadwana, Awolowo, Eyoita, Aminu Kanu, they were the heads of parties, all signed a declaration which led to the creation of Federal Public Service Commission and all that. And where discipline, except a few posts like PAMSECs, judges, all that, reserved. Every other thing was under the Public Service Commission. But the point is that when we now had the public service and all that, there were clear specifications. The educational standard you must have to enter what position. Even in the West, where they became too many, you had, apart from your degree, to do some entrance exam. Civil service entrance exam, to choose the best for the public service. And then, when you entered, there were clear stages, the courses you must undertake, at what programs. The reports you get is on that basis you are then recommended for promotion and assignment. And this is important because this is what I was leading to. It is this sort of well-trained, well-selected civil service that is then able quickly to rehearse options. And I'm very, very sad today. You hear them say government is doing this, doing this, doing that. When you now look for the details, you don't see that things have been carefully worked out, the projects. For instance, National Recovery Plan. I've looked at it. Where are the projects? Where are the policies? Where are the strategies? How do you monitor it? And the people going to do it, have they been adequately trained? Were they selected? These are things we must go back to. We had it, and we can go back to it.
Thank you for watching.